Just out of curiosity, how many of you guys feel confident in your ability to keep somebody from getting injured if they have like a bad knee or something like that? Feel confident? Okay, cool. Do you feel like you understand the behaviors behind the bad joint that made it bad in the first place? Kind of? Yeah? Okay, cool. That's what I do. I'm the pain guy here. I get paired up with anybody who can't really get paired up with anybody else. Or if we have somebody who gets injured by a trainer and then they stop coming, again, that's kind of my demographic. So the way that I see it is, if you guys can learn to keep people safe in your workouts, then that's that much less of a likelihood that you'll lose them as a client just because they got injured. Right, because it happens all the time. Like they're just getting started, they come in and they do something to their knee, and then they slow down the sessions and then they just stop coming altogether. Which is great for me because I get clients from it, but at the same time, I think it'd be really sick if as a gym, we kind of understood how to train people away from injury and not towards them, okay? So that's kind of why I structured everything the way that it is. Recognition is just you noticing that they have an inefficiency in their body, whether it's a spinal thing, whether it's in the knees. It's a simple shape recognition, so looking at the shape of the body and just understanding what's more efficient and what's less efficient. Reaction is your reaction to noticing what's going on, and how do you adapt your program, how do you change things, do you change them at all, do you kind of just keep doing what you're doing? And then retention is once you've provided this little extra service of letting them know, hey, you've got this thing going on. If they're already not aware of it, or if you're able to actually correct and fix something for them, well, then they're more likely to stay with you as a client, right? Because then they feel safer with you than they would with anybody else. And that's the biggest feedback that I get from people, is that they just feel safe with me, so that's why they're gonna stick to training with me. Lily helps too. All right. So what are injury patterns? They're patterns of movement that initially or eventually pull bones out of alignment with each other. This causes the joints in between to bear weight and transfer force in a suboptimal manner, which can eventually lead to a non-contact injury. Everybody knows what non-contact injury means, right? It means nobody hits you, nothing, you step a certain way and you blow out your knee. Some misalignments may never cause an injury or discomfort, but regardless of the sensory input, the injury patterns will always work against the clients and their goals by limiting their ability to move more efficiently. Meaning that if not everything's in alignment, their body's working harder than it should. Gravity can't find the path of least resistance when the body's out of shape, okay? So I just want to reiterate, like, your guys' goal with clients is to keep them safe, so I just threw this in there. What's your main duty during sessions? To lead clients through a safe but challenging and enjoyable workout which complements the body type, the goals, and the stylistic preferences of each individual. So this means that you're keeping them safe, but you're not changing the flow of the workout. They can still lift heavy weights. They can still do lots of like yoga type mobility work. Whatever it is that they want, you can provide it to them, and you can just keep them safe within that context. So I've already kind of talked a little bit about this, but clients who sign up for training usually eventually admit to having limitations or discomforts within certain movements and exercises. I know we've all experienced this, where somebody goes to do a push-up and they're like, I feel it in my shoulder. I can't do it, it's too much. I have an old lingering injury there, or something along those lines. Some of these symptoms are characterized by recognizable misalignments in the skeletal system, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. So regardless of pre-existing negative symptoms or visible alignments, even a single injury will discredit the safety of your programming and disrupt all the hard work that you're both putting in. It doesn't just screw up them, it messes with your schedule, right? You can't fill up your slots anymore if the people can't come in and work. So if you can recognize basic injury patterns and make clients feel safer by programming your exercises accordingly to their body type, you will have a much easier time meeting each client's stylistic preferences. I see this all the time, and I never say anything because it's not my place or anything, but there is, no matter where I'm at, what gym I'm at, who the trainers are, there are people who are unknowingly implementing exercises that exacerbate these discomforts unknowingly, right? You're not going to knowingly put somebody through something that you know might cause them pain later. but it reinforces their particular injury patterns. And this just comes back to like, are you just putting people through a workout that you go through yourself? Like, is it just your stuff, or are you actually customizing all your routines? The most critical miss here is the potential danger of doing an exercise that could cause a non-contact injury, resulting in debilitating pain, inability to continue training, and the potential loss of a client. So I think that really all of these imbalances, injuries, misalignments, they all stem from the same thing, which is the fact that we're all a little asymmetrical. Nobody in here just stands perfectly throughout through their entire day, and that's because a lot of the times when we're in the womb and we're developing, we get a little twisted. And in that time period in our lives, we're more developmental, so everything is more cartilaginous. Everything's connective tissue. Like, the bones haven't really formed as much depending on how far you are into your development. So when something gets twisted out of place, it won't correct itself. So then we have this like pelvic twist going on, and then we're born, and as we start to develop, crawling, walking, doing all this stuff, the hips grow into like the actual pelvis and the bones solidify, and now you've got an asymmetry that is ingrained in your body. It's not impossible to get rid of it, but it's extremely stubborn, and for some people it's worse than others. Rarely have I ever met anybody with symmetrical hips, okay? So the way that you guys are identifying it is you're looking at the bony prominences. What are their heels doing? What are their kneecaps doing? Are they tracking correctly? Where's their chest pointed, the sternum or the breastbone, and what's going on with the tailbone? Is it tucked underneath? Is it extended out? These misalignments are characterized in movement by less efficient force absorption and production, meaning that when you're lifting weights, you're either producing force or you're trying to absorb it. Those are two completely different behaviors, and if you approach them both the same, you're squeezing muscles the whole time, you may be improving the quality of the muscle tissue but destroying the quality of the connective tissue that holds your joints together. Very specific reason for this. But the second that those patterns start altering and you don't absorb force, you don't produce it as efficiently, that's a compensatory pattern. Gravity can no longer find the most efficient way to move through your body, so your body is universally adaptable in the sense that when you're in nature, and I've posted about this online before, you sprain your ankle, you have to be able to misalign your hips, misalign your shoulders so that you can find a level gaze and you can make it out of that situation alive, right? These adaptations are not a bad thing. It's a good thing that we're able to do them, but now that we have all this technology and information, we should address them instead of just letting them linger, okay? So it's a prioritization of the misalignments, the imbalances, all that crap before you start all the strengthening and all the other things, the mobility, that stuff. Suboptimal pressure distribution, all I mean by that is that your body is a system of liquid and gas pressures, right? Liquid meaning that all your tissues are filled with water. We're like 70% water. So especially your connective tissue, it is called viscous, meaning that it's basically a spider web that's all wet. And what happens is when you don't move through all your ranges of motion and you don't do the correct mobility stuff or whatever you want to call it, maybe it's your gait pattern that's off, there will be areas in your body where those viscous tissues, the connective tissues, they stick together. So you guys may see it as like the shoulder is limited in mobility, but I see it as you're all tied up in the opposite hip, so it's limiting that shoulder's range of motion. I saw a really good example of this on a TED Talk where this guy came out and he was wearing a morph suit. Do you guys know what that is? Right? And so the lady speaking, she walks up to him and she says, I'm going to show you guys what a myofascial adhesion looks like. She has the kid kind of move around his arm and his shoulder. And then right after that, she goes up and she grabs the morph suit on the opposite hip and she twists it up like this. And she says, okay, go ahead and move your shoulder again. And he like can get maybe 50, 60% of the same range of motion. So an adhesion down here can affect the opposite shoulder, which means that by principle, you could have a broken pinky toe and it could be messing with your neck mechanics. I'm not going to teach you guys how to sift through all that today. I'm going to teach you more generalized patterns that pretty much everybody shows from living in a modern lifestyle. Okay? And the biggest pressure distribution issue that we have is the breath. Because when you're seated like this for hours at a time, or you're watching TV or whatever, your body's perfectly fine with going there. but the amount of time that you spend there will just determine how much your body adapts to that position, because I'm not just sitting here. We never stop moving completely. I'm sitting here and I'm breathing. And I'm breathing with a different hip angle. I'm breathing with a different rib angle. And my body's getting used to it. And some people, their breath actually adapts their posture to make the breath more efficient. So now you go to stand up and you try to get rid of all those movement patterns, but then your breath pulls you right back into it. Because you change the angle of your ribs, you change the angle of your hips, and your muscles responded to that. So now your diaphragm's locked up. You can't take a full deep breath. You can't hold your posture well, and you can't oxygenate your blood supply. So at the end of the day, you're just a less efficient human being. And this is all, in my opinion, initially caused by that misaligned pelvis. Because if you had a perfectly symmetrical pelvis, you would be a lot more likely to move more, because it would be more comfortable. It would be more uncomfortable for you to stay in place. As you have this asymmetry develop in your hips, you start to find positions that are actually really comfortable. They're just super dysfunctional because it's feeding into that asymmetry in the hips. So you'll notice when you're sitting, you might be, hang on just a sec, you might be putting more weight on one side, or you might be tilting your head to one side because you can breathe more efficiently into that side. What's up?
So when you find a comfortable way of standing that is like slanted, but you also feel more comfortable moving than standing, what's happening there? I love moving and I feel very comfortable, but I also feel comfortable standing.
Well, you are pushing away from that more dormant lifestyle where you're just, you know what I mean? Like you're active, you're a trainer, you're on your feet all day. The more that you spend time in those dormant behaviors though, where you're seated and you're studying or you're doing whatever, the more your body acclimates to that. It's not like a black and white thing. This is all gray area, and your body is constantly adjusting and adapting. You're winning the fight against gravity. That's what life is, right? We never stop unless we're laying completely flat on the bed. But even still, every one of us has woken up and been like, "Ooh, I slept funny." Because gravity's still acting on you even when you're laying in bed. Okay, so no matter what, every position that you put yourself in is either contributing to your overall mechanics or is taking away from it. And that's why you guys will see me like stand in these weird positions with people, or instead of just, kind of sitting next to someone like this, I'll be in Seiza position, because this allows me to provide the path of least resistance for gravity to travel through me. So I'm very picky about the way that I place my body throughout the day. And just like anybody else, sometimes I let it go, but then I catch myself and I correct and move on. So how do these things form? We talked about it mainly, like the pelvis is the root cause. But when you look at more of a macro perspective, we're looking at genetic predispositions, which I think actually don't really contribute that much. We all have the same amount of fingers and toes and limbs and all that stuff. So it really is going to come down to things like the environment and the behaviors. Those are really what's shaping us. So habitat, living a modern lifestyle with hard surfaces, chairs and shoes contribute to a change in development. This means that in the shoes, your feet can't spread, right? Unless you get a wide toe box or something like that, toe spacers. I know Bijan's on that. Especially when you start wearing like Converse and certain shoes that are a lot more narrow, like old school Vans, your toes get squished. And it's not a big deal now if you're not in pain. Some people get bunions from it, but eventually I work with people in their 60s, 70s, 80s. I've worked with a guy who's 93. We all end up like this inside our shoes, right? So there's ways to deal with that, but the initial thing that's happening here is your body is still in that kind of jello state when you're first born. And what are people doing nowadays? They're putting shoes on like 1-year-olds, 6-month-olds. So now their feet never even really have a chance to fully develop, have that toe splay, all those things that are that's our foundation. If our foundation can't spread, absorb force, produce force efficiently, everything else gets constricted from there. You can see it in somebody who has really bad bunions, their gait is going to be a little bit different from everybody because their toes are constantly pulling their feet out as they move forwards. Chairs, we have a chair built into us. So every time we sit into a chair, it's like a halfway point where we're not actually resting. We're still propping ourselves up, but now you've cut off your body's ability to access your glutes. So that's why you guys have ever heard of like secretary butt or just like, like super flat glutes? That's what that comes from, is you're not using them. You're stuck in your hip flexors and your psoas, and you just operate there all day. Even when you're standing, even when you're showing exercises, some people are still in that position. So chairs and shoes are the main things. Hard surfaces aren't great. Tile, wood floor. Like, I grew up on mostly carpet, so I had the freedom to crawl and roll around and do all kinds of stuff. The second you get on that harder surface, you're limited, right? The second Karoosh sat down on that chair, his back started hurting. So in general, if you're trying to work on stuff, it is helpful to just go out in a grass field and like start practicing things so that you're on a surface that actually absorbs your footprint a little bit, and allows you to kind of feel things more neurologically, right? Have a deeper understanding of what's happening. With the behaviors, like obviously video games, tablets, all these things are terrible for posture, for movement. And I see it getting worse every year. I've worked with a lot of kids. I coached like a wrestling class at a local MMA gym. There's 4 and 5 year olds all the way up to 10. Pretty much all of them were like this. I had to fight to get these little kids to have straight feet. So it is getting worse and worse. It makes me think of WALL-E, honestly, when everybody's like in the chairs, glued to the screen. But that's the direction that we're headed in right now, and so it's important to kind of alter certain behaviors. For example, like I have to do a lot of work on my tablet or on my laptop, so I get the standing desk going, or I use that tripod to hold my iPad so that I'm not sitting, and I can fidget, I can move still. I have that freedom because I'm choosing to not put myself on a couch or in a chair. Whoops. So we already kind of talked about this. It's not just the tension that gets thrown off, it's the pressure in your body. It's the way you breathe. It's the way that you distribute moisture inside your tissues and in your joints. Another like fluid thing to think about is the synovial fluid in all your joints. If you feel something popping or clicking when you're moving, it just means that that fluid's starting to get built up in one area and it's not moving around like it should be. It's like that whole being fluid in your movement, like Bruce Lee kind of the thing. There's a very scientific aspect to that. Anytime you feel pressure, like a pressure point, it's just a buildup of moisture inside the tissues. So when you guys see me put people on the massage table and I'm working on them, I'm feeling for moisture buildup and then I'm spreading it out, making sure that when they stand up, they can kind of actually move all those tissues instead of having them locked into each other. Once you lose structural integrity in your feet and in your hips, everything starts to go. You guys will see this when you start watching people on their squats and things. They'll have their feet turned out, but for some reason their ankles and their knees like go in when they do anything, when they do a lunge, when they squat. And that in itself is a major, major injury pattern. That's meniscus, that's ACL, that's Achilles, that's low back pain, it's all kinds of stuff. Well, one, you can see how that initial pelvic asymmetry will initially contribute to all kinds of different things going on, right? Even the shoulders dropping, the head coming over. And this is going to be really consistent anywhere where society's been modernized, where people live like us. But you go to an indigenous place and you look at the population there, none of them stand like this, right? None of them stand like this. They're all usually either here or down here or something along those lines. And it's because they just live differently than us. So that comes back to behaviors, not genetics, right? Everybody knows what the CNS is, yeah? It's not just the spine, it's the skull, the spine, and the hips. So when I say CNS, I mean all three parts. So your CNS controls the whole body neurologically from the spinal cord. So its shape and function are like your main priority if you're trying to keep somebody out of pain during their workouts. This means that if somebody's tail tucking at the top of a squat, you're going to adjust that before you start adjusting the feet or anything else. Okay? The CNS has one primary goal: keep the spinal cord safe. We know what the spinal cord is, right? Runs in the middle of the spine through all the vertebrae. If that gets damaged, you're paralyzed, right? That is where everything goes wrong initially, and then everything out from there just radiates out because that's how our movement works. So in order to protect the spinal cord, the CNS will reflexively alter or freeze just about any moving joint in a defensive attempt. All movement behaviors originate in the CNS, so a misalignment in your spine can shoot out to your elbow, to your wrist, to your finger, and so on and so forth. A strong structure needs a solid foundation, and so that's why we focus on the CNS, not just the spine, because if the hips are uneven, how could the spine ever be even? Right? So we address the hips first, because that also may be your primary foundation. If you sit all day, you are on your hips more than you're on your feet. So address the hips first, especially for people who are already in pain or discomfort. The feet come in a close second because of all the shoes and everything. Like the feet are altered in a way where the hips and the feet can't connect. So you can work on the hips all day, but eventually you're gonna have to address the feet too. Oh, and also look at how that initial spin out in the foot travels up, right? And it gives you all these different things. Technically, this should be head to toe, and it should show you all the things. It should show you that eventually you can end up in a forward head posture, total mouth breather, just because your feet suck. That's an important thing to understand, because people see someone like that who has that kind of a structure and they think it's genetic, but it's not genetic. That is a behavioral issue. So when you're trying to fix somebody's spine, you're just looking for those 3 natural curvatures and teaching them what it feels like to be in those. A lot of people, their curves are flipped, right? So they try to fix their posture and they extend this portion of the spine that's actually supposed to be a little bit flexed. By extending here, they have to end up tucking here, and some therapists and doctors even teach people to tuck the tail to protect the lower back. But what you end up doing is you give up the structural integrity of your body as a whole to protect one tiny little part. And then, so you have your reverse C, which is extension in the neck, true C, thoracic flexion or a flexed thorax, and then reverse C again. So the lower back and the tailbone are supposed to extend out. There's moments where it tucks underneath, but that's a gait behavior. When I step forward, one side of my pelvis and one side of my spine technically are going to rotate and flex forward, while the other side rotates and extends. So they're kind of moving against each other, and then it switches. If you're stuck in a tail tuck here, you've only got half your gears working while you're walking. And this is your baseline for functionality, because if those curves are altered at all, that means that the spinal cord is no longer safe, so your CNS is just ready to freeze something, freeze the shoulder, freeze whatever, to feel like it's safe, okay? And this is not something that you can just instantly control, because this is subconscious and unconscious behaviors. All right, there are major and minor degrees of misalignment. The more severe the misalignment, the more rapidly it wears on the musculoskeletal system. It's a result of poor movement patterns, compensatory patterns, breath inefficiencies, force traumas, and in rare cases, genetics. You have spinal bifida, like you're gonna be messed up no matter what, right? But that doesn't mean that improvements can't be made even in those extreme cases, which is why I'll never say no to any of the clients here. I always have faith that I can actually help them get better, because most of them are not in these things that we're talking about, in those alignments. Solidified by compensations throughout the rest of the body, misalignments cause the body to isolate certain parts, example, frozen shoulder. So it's not just the initial thing that I do that causes it to stay, it's all the other compensations that form around it, and it's me getting used to that movement pattern. And yeah, once the joints collapse, it's just like a building where the foundation is cracked, there's an earthquake, and then the building starts to kind of sink, or it loses its structural integrity. Do you have a question?
Yeah, how long, so I'm looking at these spines, and that's so bad, that's horrible. The second one's got me creepy. So how long would it take for you to correct that?
There's a lot of variables that contribute to that, right? If somebody is, for example, not active at all, they're like, let's say they're a day trader and they sit in a chair for 14 hours a day, their time period is more than likely going to be a little bit longer. Age is another variable. You know, whether like the body type, because I'm a hypermobile type, so I'm double jointed, all loose. Some people are way too tight all around. You kind of have to, you'll feel it out, but generally what I tell people, if I'm working with a kid, it's like 3 to 6 weeks. If I'm working with somebody between like 20 and 40, 6 to 8 weeks. And then if they're above the age of like, even above the age of like 50, I'll say, okay, 3 to 6 months is probably what we're looking at, okay?
What type of frequency? Like 1 time a week?
Ooh, yeah, see, there's another variable right there. You're taking everything into account, and here's what I tell people that's generalized, that tends to work. 6 to 8 weeks to start seeing change in the body. Any kind of imbalance, dysfunction, whatever, if they're doing the right things for it, it's not going to take more than 6 to 8 weeks for them to feel something, right? So you're not lying by any means. You're projecting like the most likelihood thing that's going to happen, because the reality is it does take your body around 6 to 8 weeks to start realizing, oh, we're trying to adjust. We need to start altering the movement patterns and altering the breath patterns and all that stuff. But you also, it depends on your consistency with the client. Like, are you drilling it into their head during the session, or are you just mentioning something at the start, like, hey, keep your hips back, and then letting it go for the rest of the time? People tell me all the time, like, I'm in their head constantly, no matter where they go, what they do. Like, they're thinking, like, what would Jordan be saying right now, you know? And that's a powerful thing for multiple reasons, because if you're in their head constantly, they're going to be doing the things that you want them to do. You know what I mean? They're going to feel shame when they don't. So it's almost like accountability. If you're cueing them constantly and they realize just how bad their movement is, they're going to work that much harder to show up to sessions and do all those things. So these are some basic imbalances. I like to say that there's two main observable types of dysfunction, and they're usually going to be something front to back, right? In that space or that dimension. Your sagittal plane or whatever you want to call it, and then side to side, so asymmetry, rotational. Can anybody point out a front to back imbalance here? Just take your best guess.
The guy, the red guy.
What'd you say?
The guy in the middle.
This guy? What's that?
Front to back.
Yes, sir. Yeah, flexion extension, right? He's hyperflexed at the thoracic spine, which the flexion is not initially a bad thing. It's the degree of it. Right? What's up?
I was just going to answer that too.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Can anybody point out a side-to-side asymmetry? Exactly. Yeah. The asymmetries in the side-to-side, what happens? Oh, go ahead.
So I have a girl who I think she's got that, like, would you say hyperflex thoracic spine? She's got like curve in her back. It's almost like a hunchback. And she's like a mom, super thin, but like I just noticed it in her back. What would you say your biggest things to adjust that?
It would be the exercises that you're giving her, you want to promote an external torque in the body, meaning that nothing that she's doing is bringing her into this, right? She's not doing like crunches. She's not doing, what else? Like a whole lot of like pressing motions and things like that. You want to do things that get her to extend and open up this way. Yeah. Wait, did somebody else say something? Pull. Yeah, pull, exactly, right here. And that's a general rule of thumb. There may come like an instance where, or you can like switch it up, and instead of having her do a press on both sides, have her do unilateral stuff that allows her to kind of open up the mobility through the thoracic spine. Remember that this should be the most mobile part of your spine. The cervical spine and the lumbar should be generally pretty stable in their extension, right? And you can tell this because when you're extended like this, you can't side bend as much. You don't have as much space, but when you go here, you have lots of room. So you really are just trying to feel for that sweet spot, and you'll see it on her. You'll see when she finally opens up. And a lot of it has to do with cueing too. The hyperextension, hyperflexion thing is not just the spine. Like when you see people doing this during an exercise, that is a high injury pattern. They've got pressure in their heels, their hamstrings aren't holding tension, their knee is literally bending backwards. If you see somebody, I call this bird legs, right? If you see somebody's knee bending backwards during anything, do not let them go there. Just shrink their range of motion down. Keep their knees slightly flexed. And they'll instantly start to feel more glutes, more hamstrings, all these things, just when they make that tiny adjustment.
So that comes from a lack of what, like glute strength, hamstring strength?
Root cause, always come back to the pelvic imbalance, okay? Because muscles are dumb. They don't think reflexively. They just do what they're told to by the central nervous system, right? Even the connective tissue is considered a sensory organ because it reacts and responds on its own. If I go to spank her and she knows, I'll see her connective tissue like jump before she moves anything else. So the connective tissue almost has a thought process of its own, similar to the spine where it's reflexes. The muscles just do what they're told. And, and the last thing is that the muscles are going to flick on and off like a switch according to positions of the bones. So if there's an asymmetry in the hips, right, the muscles are just firing according to that. If you tackle that initial asymmetry, the muscles will all start firing differently on their own. It's just like when I had you take pressure out of your heels for the first time, and you're like, whoa, like what is going on? I'm feeling all this stuff. You changed one bony prominence. You took pressure out of your heels, and your whole body started flicking on and off like light switches. That's how your muscles function, and that's why I don't cue people to ever squeeze muscles, okay? Because our movement is a rhythm that's supposed to move through the body. We're not built to hold tension in any areas unless it's like a stabilization thing, but even then, we're not really like squeezing per se. When you start consciously trying to interject and say, no, I want this to squeeze, I want this to squeeze, you throw off the rhythm. And again, now gravity can't find that path of least resistance. So get the bony prominences right and the muscles will fire on their own.
So you want to release as much muscle activation whenever you're trying to get the body to like line up correctly?
In an overactive area, yes. There is this theme of duality in the body where the answer is never one thing. There will be certain areas in the body that need to relax, and then there will be antagonistic areas that need to pick up tension, right? If my pecs are super tight and overworked, my lats are going to be stretching to compensate for that because they have a relationship to each other. The bicep, if it's super tight and overactive, same thing for the tricep. You're going to have trouble building and even feeling your tricep, all three heads, because you're so overactive here, not just in your workouts, but in your lifestyle. We live a bicep dominant lifestyle, right? So it's always, you have two options, right? Sometimes the hamstrings, even within each muscle, right? The medial head of the hamstring, the inside head here has a proclivity to become overactive. The outside head is pretty much always underactive. What's up?
Going back to the bird legs, limiting range of motion would not be the best way to fix it, but what are some other ways to make up for that?
Take pressure out of the heel. Cue the heel and the tailbone. If they're tucking their tail, that's not good. The heel thing is the bigger one here because when you drive through your heels, you are telling your body, let's collapse a little bit so that we can get under this weight and we can get it up. You're stacking the joints against each other. You are finding the path of most resistance because it's going to be what lets you hang on to that weight. Does that make sense? Okay. And this one right here, scoliosis, that's a rotational imbalance, right? Because rotation doesn't have to look like this. It can be tiny. And if your hips are jello when you're born and you have this little twist when you come out of the womb, your ribs are a little twisted, if nobody ever addresses it, you're going to crawl with that twist. You're going to learn to walk with a little twist in your spine. And you'll see it. You'll see kids who crawl kind of funky. They crawl like on one side of their body. That's all it is. They had an imbalance that they never really corrected.
How do you fix that in kids?
That's a process on its own, but they're much more malleable than we are. So it's easier. And their body's a lot closer to their intuitive patterns. If you just tap into it, their body will start they'll start moving better almost instantly. I trained a 13-year-old kid today, and I almost don't have to cue him on anything, because once I give him the movement, his body does what it's supposed to. The most I'll have to do is maybe tell him to like lift his sternum a little bit, and then I see his entire spine take the shape that I want. So sometimes it's like minimal, and you'll meet people who are like, they're in so much pain, but when you cue them, they look so good that it's hard to figure out what's going on. But eventually you will find, oh, pressure in the heels. Okay, got it, you know? All right, so the W and G, it just stands for GOTA and WOTA. All that means is, it's one of the certifications that I have. GOTA means good, WOTA means bad, okay? You can see kind of the patterns, how they present themselves in movement. And then you can see how when she just has her feet straight, it just organizes everything. It's kind of hard to tell in this picture, but you can see it a lot better here. Like, this is the kind of thing that we're going for. It's pretty standard, right? Straight feet, thumbs forward, knees are straight, tracking straight, not in or out, all that stuff. And then this is the pattern that I see in everybody who comes in here. Can everybody stand up real quick? And like stand in a line right here? And we'll see, I'll call out the things here that I see on every, you guys fully corrected yourself. That's fine. Okay, so like feet turned out for Felix, right? Jesse, your feet are straight, but you are hyperextended in the knees, right? You have a little bit of the bird legs. Chris, you look good, but you look twisted and your left shoulder's higher than your right, right? So his main thing, like everything looks really good, but you got that rotation ingrained in your body. You're probably rotating a lot better to the right than you are to the left. Feet turned out, your hips are forward, and your thumbs are turned in, right? So you exactly match this, just much less noticeable. The girl on the left and the thing on the left, all right? You're just a little bit tilted, so left shoulder high, just like Chris. Your feet are generally straight. Most of you guys are big toe straight, and we're going to talk about that in a sec. Your hips are definitely coming forward, right? So if you're like thrusting at the top of your squats, I would stop doing that. Or if you're doing like the hip thrusts, like I would just chill on them for a little bit. So Logan, thumbs turned in. Feet are really straight, but I can tell your arches collapse in. Right? Just by the shape of your shoe, I can tell that everything's kind of moving in. So what you would want to do is when you walk now, try and feel the outside edge here versus being stuck in here.
I do notice that. Yeah, I do come with that.
It starts in the heel, so you got to get pressure out of the heel first, but then you can fix that. Bijan, your arches too, you can tell they want to collapse. Your right foot's turned out more than your left, so that's like a good inclination that you're right hand dominant and that you favor that side. You kind of do everything. You change direction more on that side, all that stuff. Okay, thumbs are turned in. Shoulders are almost even. The left one's a little bit higher. But you see how it's not crazy, like hard to recognize these things. I've been doing it for longer, so I can kind of spit it out pretty fast. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can see it, you look around the gym just like, oh man, it's everywhere and it's really bad. And so this kind of provides an opportunity for you guys. It's like another thing to tackle with your clients. Like they don't realize that in their daily lives, the way that they're doing things, even the ones who are trying, even the ones who are doing this all day long are still perpetuating those symptoms. They're just altering one thing about the shape, right? Nobody in here is doing the second toe forwards thing, and that is what is the fix to the big toe straight foot, is getting your second toe forwards looking borderline pigeon-toed, right? I think Andreas is the only one that I've really taught this to, but you can even do... Yeah, it's a more efficient force production and absorption. You hit a wall, you're going to be able to hit it a lot harder with your feet turned in. That's just the reality. You throw a ball, you do anything. And it's because of the fact that your body has a grain to it. The connective tissues, they follow a pattern just like your hair does. And when you shave against the grain, what happens? You get inflamed, you get ingrown hairs, you get all this crap. When you move against the grain, same thing happens in the joints. They flare up. It's as simple as that. Okay.
I have someone at 3.
Oh, yeah, you're good, bud. What's up?
Just show us what the perfect stance looks like.
Perfect stance. Okay. Actually, we're just about to get to that, so hang on. So this all makes sense, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question real quick about the thumbs.
Yeah.
So what is the thumbs like in?
That is just telling me what your shoulders are doing, right? It's a physical marker, so you're turned in, which is not initially a bad thing. Something important for the guys who do a lot of weightlifting to understand is that your pec major and your lats have the exact primary function, but we train them opposites, right? So your pec and your lat, they want to turn your shoulder in. It's not bad to be here, it's bad to be stuck here. And if you breathe and you stay here, then that's like kind of a general sign that you're stuck there. If I take a breath in and my thumbs face forward, yeah, definitely.
I'm stuck there.
Yeah, so, sometimes it's as simple as just like releasing the pec muscle and like warming it up a little bit and orienting it a little bit more around an external rotation, then the thumb will fall straight. You're not actually like doing anything with your thumbs to fix it. It's just like, that's how you know, oh shit, like I'm turned in.
So what I'm feeling is when I fix the thumbs, like not from the hand, but from the origin of the shoulders, I actually have to squeeze my back muscles a lot.
Yes, because when you move the hands first, it's gesturing, right? It's not locomotive movement, which that's our primary behavior, is to move forwards or to just move in general. When I correct something here, like it's not gonna stay unless it happens at the spine. So yes, you do have to squeeze, but you don't actually have to squeeze.
What I'm saying is that's what's happening, so that means I have to grow my back muscles more.
It means that you need to work on the positioning of your spine and your shoulder blades and making sure, actually, on top of that, your ribs, right? Because your shoulders are gonna turn in the second that your shoulder blades stop rotating efficiently. And they can only rotate efficiently if they have a nice, big, broad surface to move on. If your ribs are all out of whack, the shoulder blades can't rotate. There's no synovial joint there. It's called a gliding joint. So it's a very delicate balance, and most people in here don't have the best shoulder blade movement. Shoulder blade movement controls the entire shoulder. You don't have that. You have a rotator cuff that's a little restricted, it will mess with everything. So you have to work on shoulder blade rotation, breathing into the backside of the ribs down by the kidneys, because that's where most of the lung tissue is, and just creating more of an awareness of the backside of the body in general. You see, it's not just that you need to create tension here, it's that you need to create tension all the way through here so that all points pull you back. And the only hard part about that is if you just start doing this all the time, you go into your heels. So you have to learn how to kind of float inside your own body, and that's what the skeleton wants to do. It doesn't want to be pushed forwards or pulled backwards. It wants to float, but it floats in that back chain dominant position, right? Which one of these looks more solid? Right one, right? Yeah? And unfortunately, like, all of us do this. I still do it. What's up, Jeff?
How come when people, like let's say they're feeling something in their knees and you cause them, like you tell them like, I don't know, IQ people will put more weight in your heels, they're getting more activation here, and it literally alleviates that pain in your knees.
Yeah, so what you're doing is you're establishing tension in the muscle by changing the force in the foot, right? You're altering the way that they distribute their weight, but the reality is that you could just tell them to push their hip back and it would have the same effect. You're just doing it from the opposite end.
A little bit differently.
Yeah, and I wouldn't cue anybody to drive pressure into their heels unless it's for something super specific, because most people are already stuck in their heels. Does that make sense? And what the change that she might have felt was she might have gone from like one part of her heel to another. You know what I mean? So the goal is to always get the body prepped and primed to move on the midfoot, forefoot, because that's the healthy behavior. And then when you want to do something specific, like get weight up or, that's the main thing, right? Because that's a lifting behavior. I'm not going to drive my heels into the ground to throw a punch. I'm going to drive the balls of my feet and let my heel flip out. You guys watch Tom Brady throw a ball. He doesn't slam his heel and then throw. He actually whips his heel out like this, and then he throws here. Mike Tyson, he throws a punch and his heel flips out. It's how your body actually releases tension. Because if you don't have a full release like that, something like this, and you stomp into your heel, the tension stops there. Our body never wants to hold tension, right? If I am walking, I want my body weight to leave my toe tips and my fingertips each time that those limbs move. And you'll see when somebody's tension is not leaving their body because it'll get stuck, right? And that's the eventual goal, is just fluid movement. Okay, so the cues that you use to get them to this place, I use the same cues with pretty much everybody. And does everybody understand the concept of front chain dominant versus back chain dominant? Front chain would be rectus abdominis, right? Hip flexors, quads. Back chain, erector spinae, glutes, hamstrings. That's just a simplification for you, okay? So you're trying to get them to place more tension in the glutes, hamstrings, and erector spinae, not their lumbar spine, right? The muscles surrounding, to take pressure off the hip flexors, the quads, the whatever else. The other thing too to think about here is like a lot of people who start complaining about lower back pain, they're actually complaining about psoas pain. Because the psoas goes from here up into your lower back, and pretty much everybody's got a little bit of a locked up psoas. So you can really tell, like if you're watching their hip movement and it's all asymmetrical, don't assume, but test it. Test it and see if you can get them to move that hip a little more efficiently if the back pain goes away. The cues are pelvis behind the ribs, right? Because this is pelvis in front. Elbows behind the ribs, okay? Second toe forwards, meaning that I'm not pointing my big toe straight. I'm pointing my second toe straight. And this isn't just me. Like the scientific community is aware that when your big toe faces forwards, it's a dysfunctional pattern. That's therapists, that's chiros, that's everybody. So you're cueing your second toe forwards, and then you're learning to do stuff there, right? If I lunge sideways, I still want my second toe angled forward, because then that kind of follows the grain of the connective tissue. So instead of me like here, I can sync up my ankle, my knee, and my hip and land here in an athletic position. You start applying that to weightlifting, and all of a sudden now these people are like anti-aging, and they're developing all the muscles, they're getting rid of the fat, all that stuff. So second toe forwards, thumbs facing forward, like it's a helpful cue. It's not the best, you know what I mean? Because again, you're doing it down at the hands. But at least if you do it around your breath, which is kind of how I think you should cue everything, cue the thumbs coming out with the inhale. Right? And then that teaches all those muscles, the intercostals in between the ribs and all the stuff on the backside to actually help facilitate the breath. Right? The reason we end up here is because this is our exhalation mode. Most of us are breathing out more than we breathe in, unless you're really thinking about it and taking deep breaths throughout your day. Okay? Weight in the midfoot, that's just kind of a rule of thumb. So you can think of the foot like a scale, right? The faster you go, the more it wants to tip forward. That's why there's no spikes in the heel on track shoes, because they're basically floating here. If I'm resting, midfoot to front foot is going to be my best place, because I don't want to be in my heels. The only time that you would put weight into your heels is if you're like running and you see the edge of a cliff coming and you got to stop, right? Or a fighting behavior. That's the other big one. So in nature, like most of the time you're just moving forwards, but if a lion walks into your path, you're here, right? And you're moving in the heels because that's going to be more sturdy. You're locking the joints into position. You're getting the body ready for something that's not a primary behavior, right? Fighting is, we don't walk around like ready to fight. We just walk. That's it. So if you're stuck in this, you're like stuck in fight gear. And it's the least efficient, right? Okay, ABF, this is just something that I tell people when I get more in depth with like the posture and the resting stuff. Like, don't give up the fidgeting habits. This is not proper. I want to be comfortable here, and then I want to be free to fidget here and move here and then squat here, do my deads here, like all that stuff. I need to have freedom of movement in the back chain before any of this stuff actually sticks. I can't just be doing this all the time. I need to teach my body context My body needs to understand what it's doing and where it's at and all that stuff. Right? Remember that the muscles only respond to positioning of the bones. If I never put my bones there, my muscles never learn how to respond. Okay. ABF. So this is the reaction portion. You're assessing if your applications of current movements are accentuating injury patterns or not. You can use foundational movements if you're not sure, and that's what we'll talk about in just a second. Within each movement, you're going to try and cue them into better shapes if you can get it there. And if not, that's when you start looking at, okay, well, maybe this just isn't the right exercise for them. And then adjust and adapt the overall program to better fit the nuanced movement patterns of the client. This is what you were talking about, Jess. Like, I'm not going to have somebody train here all day when they literally walk around like this. I'm going to help them find some balance and teach them some more flexion type patterns in that upper back so that they can now go in and out of it. They can fully exhale and they can fully inhale. They're not stuck in this mode right here. Because the reality is you'll see people who are in their back chain and they have pain. So it's not that's all day. That's everybody. Yeah, what'd you say? Massage? Yeah. Oh, slouch. Yeah, slouch. Yeah, so the slouching pattern, that's your exhalation. That's where most people end up. But some people, behaviors, environment, whatever they did, maybe they're a football player, maybe somebody told them about posture and they thought like this was the best way to do it. But like I said, like there is no singular answer to everybody's problems. It's more like a scale, right? This and this. You don't want to be completely stuck in either. You want to have free fluid movement in both. But the body resonates better back here. We only know that because you look up any anatomical position, any anatomical picture of a spine, it has those three curves. You'll never look up a picture of a spine and just have it be like this, right? This is what people try to do to fix their posture. All they're doing, they're taking an extended cervical spine, they're flexing it. They're taking a flexed thoracic spine and they're extending it, and then they're flexing an extended lumbar. So they're literally reversing all the efficient shapes in their spine. So if you see somebody doing that, like nip it in the butt, I don't have people really cue their head much on posture unless like they're really, like they got Dowager's hump. Does anybody know what that is? Right, the big bump right here. So sometimes I'll have people do a slight chin tuck. Just because the vertebrae in your neck, they don't have a rib cage. They don't have something like holding them in place. So they slide around a lot more than other people. I'll get Dowager's hump to literally disappear on somebody first session during their exercise just by having them get into their back chain and then cueing a slight chin tuck. And then over time, I don't even really have to work on it with them. They'll get it to go away on their own because they know when they start doing dishes, go here. Don't be stuck here. That is a result, by the way, of a forward head posture. Dowager's hump. What's up?
So, just like for generalized purposes, when you're having people squat, do you think toes rotated out? Because you said it's like the second toe, right? Or are you wanting people doing things like that?
I want them to feel that because a lot of times that clears up pain for people. And they need access to that. They need capability to do it. It's still an issue if somebody can't squat here. Like that's not good either. But if somebody's squatted kind of like this for like their whole life, of course this is gonna feel better.
Yeah.
They haven't done it. And
Here, because I've always thought like here is like natural form, right? Like where I naturally were to stand, you kind of naturally rotate those toes out, right?
well, naturally we're kind of taught that.
Yeah.
Right? In every system. Therapy, PE, whatever. Slight turnout, drive through the heels. That's just it. So is it really natural, right? Huh?
You're driving through the hips.
Which is a great cue. But if you're stuck in your hip flexors, you need to have access to your glutes. Some people, you tell them to drive through their hips and they're like, okay, but I'm still not feeling anything back here. It's all up front.
So it's individual, not like
It is,
you can't
100%.
generalize.
Why would you have somebody who's completely stuck here go and squat like this? I'm not saying that you should have them go here and squat, because that might hurt them, but like start inching it in for them. Say, is this comfortable? Is this comfortable? Is this comfortable? If I tell somebody to make a change and they come back and they say it's uncomfortable, I don't say they did it wrong. I'm like, that's a good sign to ease off it a little bit.
What if it's not uncomfortable?
If it's good, then it's good.
Yeah.
Right? The whole point of what we're doing is we're giving them a better sensory experience of movement in general. They want to be able to move throughout their day more efficiently, or they want to be able to, let's say we're training an athlete, they want to go through their sport more efficiently. All you're teaching them is how to leverage different points of the body than they're used to.
Yeah.
If I go here, I'm going to leverage heavily on the inside of my knee, and that's going to wear down the ACL. That's why all my knee pain people, I'm a stickler for that straight foot. Because they've spent years.
Foot isn't this. It's
Straight foot is second toe forwards. Look up the bony structure of a foot, and the bones literally curve in, right? And thinking about like walking like that is crazy, because it's like, am I really going to walk like this? But all you're doing is you're following the grain. And like, it may feel funny at first, but eventually it'll start to make sense. You can see it too. It's like, I always give people this little spiel. If you're going to pound on a door, right? Like really try and like wake someone up or whatever. You're going to hit it with your thumb? No way. We just know intuitively that that's not smart. We hit with the strong side of the hand. So why are we squatting in the weak side of the foot?